When Mitch McConnell ran the United States Senate, Nancy Pelosi used to call him the Grim Reaper. Is that dynamic suddenly about to affect the Democrats' legislative agenda?
Pelosi has been blaming Mitch McConnell for sort of killing these bills for the past 2 years. Now they have, a Democrat in charge, and it's going to create this really awkward dynamic where Chuck Schumer is going to feel this heat and potentially be the bad guy here.
Hey everyone, this week we have with us on The Breakdown, Rachel Bade, one of our co-authors of Playbook, and we're talking about the Democratic legislative agenda. This is going to be very likely an important week for Joe Biden.
I mean, a lot of people think that Democrats now control all of Washington. So theoretically, they should be able to pass whatever Joe Biden ran on, whatever these Democrats ran on in congressional elections. But, they really don't run the tables this week. They're going to get this huge victory because they're going to, be able to pass Biden's pandemic relief bill. But that is able to move on this sort of wonky legislative procedure known as reconciliation. But that's not going to be the case for most of these bills that Democrats want to pass.
Let's go through those just with a little bit more detail. Guns, any chance for bipartisanship in the Senate if you're looking in your crystal ball?
The last time the Senate took a vote on guns was in 2016. They took a bunch of votes on expanded background checks. There was talk about, trying to keep people on the watch list from being able to get guns, but all of them failed. But even in times of tragedy, Congress was not able to come together to actually clear that 60 vote threshold. One person to potentially watch on this matter is going to be Pat Toomey. He's a Republican from Pennsylvania who has crossed the aisle to work with Democrats and try to put together a gun proposal in the past. But Toomey is retiring, and that makes me think that, he's in legacy mode. And we could see him push really hard. The problem is without a deadline and without a tragedy, Congress is just going to sort of sit on this issue as they have for years.
H.R. 1, which is the big House Dem election reform bill. This is obviously a huge priority. When that goes over to the Senate, how will that be greeted?
The Democrats passed H.R. 1 last Congress, the House Democrats did, and not a single Republican voted for it. Legislatures across the country right now, GOP legislatures in particular, they are trying to curb access to voting, not expand it. And so I think this has become an even more of a lightning rod issue than it was last Congress. But Chuck Schumer has committed to putting this bill on the floor.
As state legislatures move to restrict voting rights from one end of the country to the other.
Again, it's not going to pass. It's just a matter of can they pick off one or two Republicans.
Policing reform. This was theoretically an issue that had bipartisan support in the Trump era. That's another huge priority for House Dems. Is there a Venn diagram of Republicans and Democrats who could potentially get together on that and get to 60 votes to overcome a filibuster?
Yeah, so the bill that's going to pass this week in the House, which is the George Floyd policing bill, is not going to pass in the Senate. It includes, it gets rid of qualified immunity for police officers, basically these legal protections that protect cops. However, I was talking to someone over the weekend who thought perhaps at some point in the next year or so, we could see Karen Bass, who's sort of the leader on the issue in the House, work with Tim Scott, who's the only Black Republican in the Senate. Those two have talked before. The conversations never resulted in a deal. But again, I mean, it's unfortunate to say, but there's going to be another tragedy related to this matter. And at that point, you can expect to see the conversation around policing increase. And maybe that will be the impetus to get something done. But again, without a deadline, Congress is pretty much useless.
Basically, absent killing the filibuster, which is not going to happen in the next 2 years because Joe Manchin has ruled it out, and so there's not a majority to do that, Joe Biden is left with this budgetary procedure from the 70s that was really never meant to be the main vehicle for a president's priorities.
The issue is that, Biden is only has so much political capital. And again, political capital is not, It's not an endless well. And he's going to have to pick and choose when he wants to negotiate with Republicans. And even then, it's a heavy lift.
If the pandemic ends, economy is on the mend, and he passes these two massive bills through reconciliation, how much does it matter that none of this other stuff that is on the progressive wish list will pass?
Look, I mean, I think progressives are going to make it matter. And I think, progressives spent the past year super hopeful that this would be the case, that Democrats would take over Washington. And I think even if Biden is sort of holding up these legislative victories as, look, we've got something big done, the reality is Democrats haven't controlled Washington in about a decade. They see this as their moment and they want to be aggressive.